And this is where Britain's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. The stark danger of gender extremism was laid bare today after a transgender rapist convicted of 2 sex attacks against vulnerable women while a man was sent to a female prison. So this is Isla Bryson, who was previously known as Adam Graham, violently attacked the women in 2016 and 2019, but then transitioned after an initial court appearance which took place a month after the second assault. Bryson is expected to be held at an all-female institution in Stirling, but reportedly won't be held alongside the jail's general population. Susan Smith from the campaign group For Women Scotland said this shocking case exposes the dangers of Nicola Sturgeon's sick gender reform bill that would allow sex offenders to acquire a gender recognition certificate without a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. She said this case indicates that predatory and abusive men will stop at nothing to manipulate courts and torture victims. We can only be grateful that some politicians still value women's safety and dignity. But for the UK government veto, this situation could have been so much worse for the victims. Now, this terrifying news today comes after SNP politicians over the weekend posed in front of despicable placards calling for the death of women's rights activists, including this sign that said "decapitate TERFs," a term coined by hateful trans extremists. Now, scheming Sturgeon condemned the views on the placard and said it was not, quote, fair or credible to suggest the politicians pictured share or condone them. Joining me now is Fleet Street legend Kelvin MacKenzie. Kelvin, this story today seems to me that concrete proof that Sturgeon's gender recognition bill is just a catastrophe waiting to happen.
Well, something is going to happen at some stage, and nobody could have forecast this was going to be the outcome. After all, in 2016, this guy, Adam Graham, he meets a woman online and he rapes her. 3 years later, he does exactly the same thing. Police then arrest him. When he's charged, suddenly the game changes. And he goes from Adam Graham to say, I'm transitioning, and now he's a lady called, Isla Bryson.
Isla Bryson.
So he's convicted today, and now he's off to where? Where does he go? And the answer to that is, I don't know how transitioned he is, or whether there is a definition for how long the transition must be. But the Scottish authorities, and of course this happens in our old friend Sturgeon's backyard, have a problem. What do? So what they do is they kind of make it work by putting her effectively into solitary, right? Something which wouldn't happen were she a woman, and definitely wouldn't happen if she were a man. So, so justice is being turned on its head. And how can we tell that this isn't just a device by this guy, right, to get in among a lot of women where something absolutely dreadful may happen? And what does Sturgeon say about any of this? After all, she's entitled to have a view. He's now being convicted. So the judge you can't be influenced on the sentence. Okay, so the conviction has taken place. Why doesn't she come out and say, do you know what? Either this doesn't change my mind at all, this is a one-off, this is never going to happen, I'm very happy with it myself. Or doesn't she come out and say, actually, I never thought that we would end up with a man with a penis charged with rape in among the very sexuality which he had found physically attractive? Why doesn't she just say one or the other? Not to say anything is quite wrong. And have you noticed that as she's pushed ahead with all this trans stuff, actually the country, their own country, the voting has started to go the other way on having a quotes free Scotland. It's now, there's only 46% in favour of it, right? So actually, people are not stupid. They've started to see what happens when you have somebody who becomes obsessed with one aspect of society running your country. actually it's dangerous for her. I'd be very interested to see how she tries to get out of this. But I was very taken by that lady basically saying, there's not many times people are saying this, thank God for Rishi Sunak, who is actually stopping this madness from spreading. Right, but how do the people of Scotland feel when they read about this or listen to this or listen to this discussion?
The whole point is the Gender Recognition Act would mean that anyone could do this, including convicted sex offenders, without even having to get a diagnosis, without having to live in their new gender for any period of time. But I think what's most telling about this case, Kelvin, is folk like me who have been calling Sturgeon out for her trans extremism have been called scaremongers. You know, we've been told, oh, there's only a very small percentage of the trans population. This isn't going to impact the safety of women. I'm sorry. Cases like this bloke, Isla Bryson, make it absolutely abundantly clear that there are male rapists out there, sex predators, who will use these loopholes to put women at risk. And it's not about not wanting trans people to live their lives safely and peacefully, but we also have to allow biological women to live their lives safely and peacefully. And I'm sorry, if you are a female inmate in the prison that this bloke is going to, Kelvin, you're not going to feel safe or peaceful.
Well, look, I agree with you there, man. The question is, what can the Scots now do about this? They have a law. They've passed it. They're not going to unpass it. So what does this mean? So if you are a, quotes, rapist, unquotes, then the answer, of course, is head across the border. Come up with some cock and bull yarn like this guy. After all, he now says, I've been thinking of transitioning since 4. No. But the only time he actually started it was after he had already raped 2 women.
Exactly.
The truth about the matter is that women in Scotland are...
Kelvin? He's talking rubbish. I mean, this is the thing. It's made up. Well, let's just call it out for what it is. He's made this up to get into a women's prison.
OK, well, if that is right, that's what I think, and that's what any sensible person would think. But under Scottish law, they can't do anything now.
Nothing.
They are hamstrung, Nothing. Right? So they have to wait for an outcome which could be catastrophic.
Yeah, and Kelvin, what about when
what happens to the politicians?
Exactly. And what about when it's not a prison, right? What about when it's a women's refuge or a school? You know, it's like maybe people aren't going to have as much sympathy because they're female prisoners. I don't know, but I just think this is so disturbing, and it is putting the safety of biological women at threat. That is clear.
Yeah, I agree. And but however, I want to hear what Sturgeon has to say.
Well, she won't be asked about it. That's the problem, because she's got a pathetically weak Scottish media who are largely in her pocket, because she's doing these press conferences. She's not asked difficult questions. It's a joke.
But the outcome may well be, well, let's keep our fingers crossed that the outcome is not as disastrous as his 2 previous forays.
Well, let's hope not. And we'll keep on this story, and we'll keep on Sturgeon on this.
I would say for Sturgeon that she is running into serious political issues.
Yeah, because the people aren't with her on this. People aren't with her on this. Kelvin, MacKenzie, we're going to keep on this, and we will speak next week.